Welcome to photosNtravel, a show that introduces you to fascinating places around the world. Please welcome our host and tour guide, Jonathan van Bilsen.
Thank you and welcome to this episode. Today we're traveling to Alaska, the northernmost state in the U.S. and the neighboring Canadian territory of the Yukon. This region is rich in history, filled with wildlife, and has some of the most spectacular scenery you'll ever see. We'll begin our adventure right after these messages.
Thinking of indoor or outdoor signs? At PP Print, we can help with so much to offer. Just ask. We've got you covered. PP Print, where experience pays off.
Pet Value has a fleet of services to help you and your pet live their very best lives. Visit Pet Value Port Perry for all of your pet's needs. Pet Value, your pet, your store.
Welcome back. As I mentioned, today we're heading north to Alaska, as well as Canada's Yukon territory. I flew into Anchorage, the capital of Alaska, which is where our wilderness adventure begins. Not only is Anchorage the capital of Alaska, but it's also the largest city, with a population of just over 250,000 people. Anchorage began as a tented construction camp in 1915, and after a century of growth, along with restoration work after the massive earthquake of 1964, downtown Anchorage today features a mix of historic buildings with modern high-rises, interspersed with small private homes. Beautiful snow-capped mountains can be seen in all directions, and as the sun sets, their beauty seems to come alive. After a good night's rest and a lot of sightseeing, I left Anchorage to continue my trek to Wasilla, headquarters of the famous Iditarod dog sled race. The word Iditarod comes from the Athabasca name Iditarod, which means far away, and was named for their hunting grounds. In 1910, a rough trail between Seward and Nome was established and was given the anglicized name of Iditarod. In 1925, dog sleds transported life-saving serum from Fairbanks to Nome in an effort to contain a diphtheria outbreak, which mostly affected children. To commemorate this feat, a dog sled race between Anchorage and Nome was initiated in 1973, and since then, every year in early March, the annual 1,760 kilometers or 1,100-mile run, which lasts about 9 days, takes place. Credit for the life-saving event in 1925 was given to a Norwegian musher and his dog Balto. A statue was erected in Anchorage and New York City to commemorate the event. The actual hero of the trip was another Norwegian named Lennart Seppala and his dog Togo. A local newspaper in 1925 was in such a rush to print the story it did so incorrectly. Recently, however, Seppala was acknowledged as the true hero, and Disney made a film called Togo, which sets the facts straight. One of the biggest features of Alaska is Mount Denali and its surrounding wilderness. I boarded the Alaskan Railway for a 4-hour trip, taking me to the slopes of this fantastic mountain. As I left the civilization of Anchorage, I began to realize the vastness of this country. Flanked by the Arctic and Pacific Oceans, separated from Russia by the Bering Strait, and bordered by Canada in the east, Alaska lies across the Arctic Circle, covering 1.7 million square kilometers or 650,000 square miles. With just 650,000 people, Alaska is the largest and least densely populated American state. Almost half of all Alaskans live in Anchorage. Evidence of Alaska's native heritage abounds in many towns and villages where indigenous groups keep their age-old traditions alive. Many communities have Russian Orthodox churches, stemming back from their roots when Russian trappers flooded Alaska in the 1700s. Historically, Alaska's economy revolved around timber, fishing, and mining. But that changed in the 1960s when oil was discovered at Prudhoe Bay, the largest oil field in North America. This great oil field originally contained approximately 25 barrels of oil when it was discovered in 1968. Even with the closure of most sawmills, commercial fishing and seafood remained viable industries. It is estimated the first Inuit people arrived in Alaska by skin boat after the Ice Age had melted approximately 8,000 years ago. These hunters, familiar with Arctic coastal conditions, follow the marine hunting culture in the Bering Sea and along the Arctic coast. Upon arrival in the town of Denali, I checked into my lodge overlooking the vast countryside and a small village below. Continuing my education about dog sledding, I visited Jeff King's Husky homestead. Jeff King moved to Alaska from California in 1975. A year later, he began dog racing and entered the Yukon Quest, followed by 4 Iditarod wins. He now operates a successful visitors attraction where one can meet the dogs and appreciate how much work, time, and money goes into dog sled racing. During the summer days, teams of dogs are hooked up to ATVs, which have their engines removed, as these, combined with the driver, weigh approximately 140 kilograms or 300 pounds, which is equivalent to a loaded dog sled. Dogs continually train on merry-go-rounds and hamster wheels as these animals live to run. Of course, there are few things cuter than brand new puppies, and I had an opportunity to interact with them. My next stop was Denali National Park, which is famous for Mount McKinley, the highest mountain in North America. The peak sprawls across 24,000 square kilometers, or 9,500 square miles, and is larger than the entire state of New Hampshire. Private vehicles are not allowed in the park, as the environment takes priority over tourism. Buses take visitors along the 60-kilometer road which winds through the mountains and forests. Again, the sheer vastness of the land is mesmerizing. As far as the eye can see, valleys with rivers and mountains with glaciers seem to go on forever. Dall sheep with their white summer coats dot the countryside, grazing on mountain slopes. Alaskan prairie dogs pop their head from time to time just to see what's going on. There are only a handful of wolves in Denali Park, but they're still a dominant species. And of course, grizzly bears, or brown bears as they're also known, are found in abundance. As the cubs play in streams, it's easy to forget how ferocious these animals really are. Snow-clad Mount McKinley is visible from many points in Denali Park. Without question, the best way to see it is from the air. I was fortunate as I had a very rare, nearly cloudless day and was able to appreciate the magnificence of this Alaskan mountain range. I was told that only 35% of visitors in Denali actually get to see Mount McKinley due to weather, either by air or from the ground. I was fortunate as the vistas were spectacular. Athabascans call the peak Denali, which means the Great One, but most Alaskans continue to refer to the mountain as McKinley, its old anglicized name. No matter how far one looks, the mountains go on forever. Alaska is truly an amazing place, and traveling through Denali is an experience not to be missed. We're going to take a short break and then continue our trek going east to the Yukon and back to Alaska to discover the rest of this wonderful state. We'll be back right after these messages.
At Voss, your independent grocer, it's all about hometown living and shopping. Owned and operated by Port Perry's own Terry and Christine Voss, the independent grocer carries many local items to support our town and its residents.
Welcome back. In this segment, we're going to continue exploring Alaska as well as the Yukon Territory in Canada. We're going to look at some of the history that dates back to the gold rush of the late 1800s. I continued my journey to the town of Nenana, which used to be a trading post for river travelers. At the beginning of the last century, Nenana was known as Tortilla, apparently taken from a long-forgotten Athabascan word. In the 1920s, Nenana served as a railroad construction camp and gained fame in 1923 when President Warren G. Harding drove the golden spike that marked the completion of the Alaska Railroad between Seward and Fairbanks. The buildings in town are quaint and colorful, and the Taku Chief, a river tug that once pushed barges down the Tanana River, today stands on dry ground, reminding visitors of the historical past. Forest fires are quite common in this region due to the constant dryness of the summer months. Heading east, I made my way to a small town officially called North Pole. Cute shops adorned with Christmas ornaments make one wonder if perhaps we've been magically transported to the permanent residence of Santa Claus. Even the most skeptical people soon change their tune when their host arrives. I stopped for lunch at the Pump House restaurant located on the Chena River. The grounds are covered with spectacular flowers, and although the growing season is short, the long days with 20 hours of sunshine have a very positive effect on the foliage. Old mining equipment is scattered everywhere, and many of the original buildings from the area have been relocated to the Alaskan Park, offering visitors an opportunity to see how life was during the days of the gold rush. There's a miniature village which depicts how life was for the early settlers. Houses along the river with piles of wood ready for selling to the riverboat are so detailed you can hardly tell it's not a real village when you look at it. The oil murals in the background are so well done, they even show the wildfires. I even had an opportunity to take in a review at the local music hall. My next stop was a riverboat ride down the Chena River aboard the famous paddle wheeler, the Discovery. Homes along the bank of the river vary from simple log cabins to luxury structures. Most people along this area own boats, and many have float planes. Being intrigued by dog sledding, I stopped at the home of four-time Iditarod champion Susan Butcher and met her husband, David Monson. Susan was the second woman to win the Iditarod and only one of 6 people to win it 4 times. I went on to visit the village post office where a monument to Susan Butcher's dog Granite reminds everyone of the importance these animals have to Alaskans. Sadly, Susan Butcher passed away several years ago, but her husband keeps her legacy alive. I continued my journey to an authentic Athabascan village where I saw salmon wheels in operation and watched as the Athabaskans prepared their fish for the long winter months. Animal skins are hung off the ground to protect them from scavengers, and caribou are raised for milk and meat. Elk, caribou, and reindeer are the same animal with different names. The word Inuit, which means people, is a term used in Canada and is the actual name of the people in their native language. Other nations incorrectly refer to these people as Eskimo, an old colonial name. Life in the village is rugged, and the people depend on the river for their existence, never knowing what lies around the next bend. Fairbanks is known as Alaska's Golden Heart. Italian immigrant Felix Pedro, who discovered gold near this area, met a miner who was forced ashore when his boat ran aground. Together they founded Fairbanks in 1901. The 2 men convinced Dawson prospectors to come to Fairbanks, swelling its population to 18,000. Most of the prospectors left when the scene played out in the 1920s, but the town's economy was bolstered by World War II and the construction of the Trans-Canada Pipeline in the 1970s. Today, Alaska's second-largest city enjoys a sense of stability that has outlasted both its rapid urbanization and economic fluctuations. This monument, which was erected in 2006, commemorates American pilots who in the 1940s flew airplanes from Montana to Fairbanks, where their Russian counterparts ferried them off into the Soviet Union and the battlefronts. When oil was discovered in Prudhoe Bay in 1968, no one knew how to transport it to market. It was eventually decided to lay a 1,280 kilometers or 800-mile pipeline to the ice-free port of Valdez, where a terminal and shipping facility was built to handle the crude. There have been ongoing talks of building the pipeline through Canada, but many of the locals are opposed to the idea, wanting to keep the resources in the U.S. The modern city of Fairbanks is home to the University of Alaska and the famous Museum of the North. I stayed at the Bear Lodge and was surprised by its picturesque surroundings. A dairy farm just outside of Fairbanks has always attracted migratory birds, and today the site offers good opportunities to view sandhill cranes as they stop at this refuge for 2 or 3 days. I left Fairbanks heading for Delta Junction, a roadhouse that dates back to 1910. In the 1920s, it grew as a construction camp for the Richardson Highway project, and in the early 1940s, the town developed into a major service center for the connection of the Alaska Highway. Other than the pipeline running through its backyard, little has changed in the 100-year history of the town. I continued my adventure toward the Canadian border and the town of Dawson City. Massive flash floods, however, which happened quite regularly, washed out the road, and instead of our usual 6-hour trek, I ended up driving to Whitehorse, which took about 13 hours. I was grateful my driver Blaine had experienced this many times in the past. With a population of just over 20,000, Whitehorse is the largest city in the Yukon Territory. With only 27 hours of sunshine during the entire month of December and January temperatures of -50, it takes a certain type of person to live here all year round. I stopped at the Beringia Museum to learn about life in early Canada. Whitehorse is the finishing point for the Yukon Quest, a 1,000-kilometer or 600-mile dog sled race that starts in Fairbanks, Alaska. The Yukon Quest is the most difficult dog sled race in the world, and racers endure ice, snow, and extreme cold. Wildlife is common along the trail, and participants often face challenges from wolves and moose. Sled dogs can be any breed, but once they're hooked up to a sled, they're referred to as huskies. These dogs are bred for distance and are capable of running up to 100 kilometers or 60 miles in one day. Their Siberian counterparts are bred for speed and can only endure half that distance. These animals have two purposes. They live to run, and they love attention. I stopped at a small outpost along the way to enjoy what seemed to be the largest cinnamon rolls in the world. Next to it, the Montague Roadhouse was built in 1915 and was used as a roadhouse until the 1950s. The kitchen and eating area were on the main floor and the bedrooms were upstairs. The inside of the building was lined with cheesecloth in an effort to keep moss and dirt from falling into the rooms, as well as cutting down on mold. And of course, no trip to the Yukon is complete until one pans for gold. Taking careful instruction from professionals, I was quite surprised when I actually found some gold nuggets in the bottom of the pan. After my success in prospecting and finding gold, I visited a giant gold mining barge no longer in use. During its operation, it would crawl along the ground gathering tons of rocks and discarding everything except the precious gold nuggets. After a fantastic visit to Whitehorse, I headed north to Dawson City, the second largest town in the Yukon Territory. Dawson City is in the process of being restored. Many of the buildings were damaged due to permafrost and are slowly retaking shape in their original glory. Dawson sprang up overnight after gold was discovered in the Bonanza Creek in 1896. Word spread fast, and by 1898, the population had grown to 40,000. Among the inhabitants of Dawson City was author Jack London, whose famous book Call of the Wild sold millions. Another resident was poet Robert Service, whose famous poem The Cremation of Sam McGee is still published today. During the gold rush, Americans traveled from Seattle to Alaska and then on foot to the Klondike. Most were unprepared for the sub-zero temperatures and long snowy winters. The Canadian government decided not to let anyone enter the country unless they were prepared with a year's supply of goods, which weighed about a ton, half of it being food. Would-be prospectors encountered Canada's famous Northwest Mounted Police, now the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, who enforced the laws in this vast wilderness. Of the more than 100,000 people who came to the Klondike in search of gold, only 30,000 survived. A total of 12.5 million ounces of gold has been taken out of this area in the last century. I boarded the SS Klondike, one of the original steamships to travel the Yukon River. Now fully restored, it was quite a treat to sail down this historic river just like they did in the days of old, giving me a glimpse of life during the gold rush era. I left Dawson City by crossing the Yukon River, slowly making my way back to the Alaskan border. Road construction is a full-time task during the summer months, and many hours are spent waiting for construction crews to do their jobs. My next stop was the small town of Chicken, which received its unusual name when early gold miners were unable to spell the chosen name, which was that of a bird that somewhat resembled a chicken. In typical tourist tradition, everything in this town has something to do with our fine feathered friends. I stopped overnight in the city of Tok before heading on to the Matanuska Glacier. A small lodge welcomes travelers who are there to view the Blue River of Ice, which descends 3,600 meters or 12,000 feet to its 3-kilometer wide face. My last stop in Alaska was the city of Valdez, which is at the end of the Alaskan pipeline and unfortunately is best known for the large oil spill in the 1980s. It's spelt Valdez but pronounced Valdez to avoid association with the tragedy. The salmon are plentiful in this area, which of course attracts the bears. I stopped at Bridal Veil Falls to enjoy the scenery. And after saying goodbye to my driver Blaine, I took a final look at one of the most rugged areas on the planet. Visiting Alaska and the Yukon was an experience I'll never forget. The rugged way of life is not for everyone, but the scenery, wildlife, and people are fantastic. Dog sledding was a lot of fun, and exploring the history of the gold rush was very educational. For Photos and Travel, I'm Jonathan van Bilsen. It's been my pleasure to be your tour guide today, and I look forward to our next adventure. If you enjoyed this program, please click the subscribe button, and you'll never miss an episode.
Want to know what's happening in Skugog? News and lifestyle, changes in business, and all the entertainment information you'll ever need. Plus, each edition has a new Photos and Travel article. Look for your next copy in your mailbox.
Good morning, the Standard newspaper.
Now, more than ever, the Standard newspaper is trying to spread the good news, keeping our local communities informed, enlightened, connected, entertained, and educated. From our family to yours, the Standard newspaper wishes you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.